Hey everyone, welcome back to Cess Talk Sports, where we dive into the intersections of sports, race, gender, politics, culture, and justice. I'm your favorite auntie with Uncle Tendency Cess, and today we're joined by Political Lil, the sharp mind behind the Be Wise Poly Sports podcast. We're breaking down what some are calling one of the most obvious dog whistles in sports this year. Political Lil, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Seth. I'm ready to pull back the curtain and show the audience how these games, both on and off the court, are really played.
Absolutely. And today's discussion is about something that's been blowing up on social media. Caitlin Clark, her Time Magazine Athlete of the Year award, and her acknowledgement of white privilege. Now, let me set the stage for our listeners. Caitlin Clark, who's undeniably a fantastic player, recently received the Time Athlete of the Year award. During her interview, she openly admitted that she's benefited from white privilege. But here's the kicker. She also said she's earned every accolade through her performance on the court. Lil, let's pause here for a second. What do you make of this?
Seth, this is a textbook racial politics wrapped in a pretty bow. While I'll give Clark credit for acknowledging her privilege, a step many don't take, her statement conveniently sidestepped the systemic dynamics that ensure her privilege continues to work overtime. It's not just about her performance, it's about how institutions, sponsors, and media platforms elevate her visibility while often minimizing Black excellence, like that of Aja Wilson.
Right. And that brings us to this other layer, the timing. Clark's College, Iowa just announced they're retiring her jersey, and get this, it's happening on February 2nd during Black History Month. Now, if that date sounds familiar, it should. That's the same day South Carolina is honoring Asia Wilson by retiring her jersey number.
Exactly. And here's where the symbolism really gets heavy. Aja Wilson, who graduated in 2018, has achieved incredible things, not just in college basketball, but globally. She led the U.S. to gold in the Olympics. She's a three-time WNBA MVP and a two-time champion. And she's arguably the best player in the world right now. She's the global face of women's basketball.
Absolutely. And not to mention, she's already got a statue at the University of South Carolina. So why does this matter? Where's the contrast? Asia Wilson's jersey retirement is set to be broadcast on SEC Plus, a subscription-based app, while Caitlin Clark's ceremony is going to be aired on national TV on Fox.
Says, let's not sugarcoat this. That's a deliberate choice. These platforms determine visibility. Aja's accomplishments are being symbolically minimized by keeping her moment limited to a smaller audience, while Clark event is blown up on national TV.
And let's not forget the economic disparity here. Tickets for Clark's jersey retirement event are reportedly going for $1,000 a seat. Meanwhile, Asia's event has tickets priced at $64 and they've already sold out. So, Lil, let me ask you, why does this feel so calculated?
It's calculated because it is calculated. What we're seeing here is an institutional power move. It's not just about Caitlin Clark, it's about what she represents. Clark is being positioned as the face of women's basketball, not because she's the best, but because she's the most marketable to a predominantly white audience.
So, is this just about money or is it deeper than that?
It's both. The money is a surface level play, but underneath it, this is about sustaining racial hierarchies in sports. The institutions, whether it's the NCAA, media network, or even corporate sponsors like Nike, are sending a clear message. White athletes will always get the bigger spotlight, no matter how dominant Black athletes are. Okay.
And let's talk about the timing. Lil, Black History Month is supposed to be a time to uplift Black excellence. Instead, we see Caitlin Clark College choosing this exact moment to announce her jersey retirement, overshadowing Asia Wilson's moment.
It's a classic power play. By choosing this specific date, Iowa, and by extension, Clark supporters are essentially saying, yes, we see your Black History Month celebration, but here's something bigger to focus on. It's a symbolic way of reasserting dominance, using the media to say, no matter what you accomplish, we can still outshine you.
And that's exactly the question we'll be unpacking today. Is this a calculated move by institutions, sponsors, and media to sustain racial hierarchies within women's basketball? If you're just tuning in, we're breaking down the racial politics and media bias in women's basketball, using the recent events surrounding Caitlin Clark and Asia Wilson as our case study. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, Political Lil, who's about to take us on a deep dive into the historical context. Lil, this is the first time we've seen this kind of narrative play out in sports, is it?
Not at all, Seth. This is part of a long-standing tradition in American sports and media. If we're going to unpack this, we need to start by looking at the systemic positioning of white athletes as the idea. This goes all the way back to the early 20th century. In the book Make Believe Media, The Politics of Entertainment, Michael Parati explains how media has always been used to reinforce societal hierarchy. Sports media, in particular, has historically been complicit in elevating white athletes as the standard while regulating black athletes to some secondary role.
Right. And even today, you can see how that dynamic plays out. Caitlin Clark, for example, is being celebrated not just for her skills, but what she represents. Someone the mainstream sees as relatable, marketable, and safe.
Exactly. And the kicker here is that Clark herself may not even be consciously playing into this, but through no direct fault of her own, she becomes the symbol within the system. She benefits from what I like to call the Trojan horse effect, something that Trojan horse, Death of the Dark Nation by Anon lays out beautifully.
For those unfamiliar, can you break that down for us?
Sure, the Trojan horse effect refers to how seemingly harmless or even celebrated symbols like an athlete or an event are used to maintain racial and political agendas. In this case, Caitlin Clark accolades are a gift that the media and corporate sponsors use to mask a larger agenda, preserving whiteness in a dominant narrative in sport. Her Time magazine honor, jersey retirement during Black History Month aren't just coincidences. These events work to subconsciously signal to audiences that white athletes deserve the lion's share of attention and prestige, even when black athletes like Aja Wilson have clearly outperformed them on a global scale.
That's heavy, Lil. And it gets even deeper when you factor in the ideas from Brainwash by Tom Burrell. Burrell talks about how subconscious biases are reinforced by media narratives, right?
Absolutely. Burrell explains that the media doesn't just reflect societal values, it shapes them. The constant elevation of whiteness and the minimization of black excellence creates a feedback loop. For example, when the media places Caitlin Clark on a national pedestal while limiting Aja to a subscription based app, it sends a subconscious message to audience about whose achievements matter more.
And this just isn't about perception, is it? There are real consequences for black athletes when this happens.
There are, and they're far reaching. Let's take a step back and look at how systemic bias has worked in sports historically. Think about athletes like Wilma Rudolph, Althea Gibson, and even Serena Williams. Despite dominating their respective sports, they often had to fight for the same visibility and respect automatically afforded to their white counterparts. The same is true today. Ozzie Wilson is the reigning WNBA three-time MVP and two-time champion, and just led Team USA to Olympic gold. She's arguably the best player in the world, but the systemic biases and how the events are broadcast, whose moments are prioritized, and who gets media saturation, diminishes her visibility.
So even when black athletes achieve more, they're still fighting an uphill battle for recognition.
Exactly, and it's by design. The system is structured to maintain a racial hierarchy. Even as corporate sponsors like Nike position themselves as advocates for social justice, they're still playing into these dynamics. Their decision to back both Caitlin Clark and Aja Wilson doesn't mean they're being equitable. It means they're covering all their bases. But notice how Clark's promotion still seems to take precedence.
So when people say, well, Caitlin Clark can't control what the media or college does, what's your response?
I agree. Clark herself might not be actively orchestrating this, but that's the beauty of the systemic privilege. You don't have to orchestrate it to benefit from it. The institution, media outlets, the corporations are doing the work for her. All she has to do is show up.
And meanwhile, athletes like Asia Wilson are left to carry the burden of not only proving themselves, but also pushing back against narratives.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations set. By breaking down the historical and systemic context, we can help people see the bigger picture. How these dynamics aren't just coincidence, but deliberate moves to uphold racial hierarchies in sports and society at large.
If you've been following, we're discussing the racial and political dynamics behind recent events in women's basketball. I'm your host, Cess, joined by my co-host, Political Lil from BY's Poly Sports Podcast. Now let's get into the power of symbolism and timing in these events. Lil, Caitlin Clark's jersey retirement during Black History Month on the same day as Asia Wilson's retirement ceremony seems like more than just a coincidence. What's your take?
Says this timing isn't just coincidental, it's strategic. Symbolism matters, especially in a country like the U.S., where racial dynamics have always played out in public spaces, including sport. February is Black History Month, a time meant to honor and elevate Black achievement. By scheduling Caitlin Clark's jersey retirement on the same day as Aja Wilson, the message is clear. Even in spaces meant to celebrate Black excellence, whiteness will find a way to assert its dominance.
So you're saying this isn't just about honoring Clark, but also overshadowing Wilson.
Exactly. This is a classic example of what we call a pseudo event. Pseudo events are deliberately manufactured moments designed to capture media attention and shift the narrative. Historian Daniel Booston coined the term, and it's been used throughout history to distract from or diminish significant milestones, particularly Black achievement.
Give us an example of how this has played out in the past.
Let's go back to the civil rights movement. But Black leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. were making strides. They were often symbolic gestures for white institutions to reassert control over the narrative. For instance, during the March on Washington in 1963, a few newspapers prominently ran stories about unrelated white initiatives, effectively diverting attention from the march significantly. In sports, this happens all the time. Think about how Jesse Owens' dominance at the 1936 Olympics was overshadowed by narratives of Hitler's supposed dismissal of him. Stories that focus less on Owens' triumph and more on reinforcing white centric power structure.
And now in 2024, we're seeing the same playbook with Caitlin Clark's jersey retirement.
Exactly. Let's be real, Seth. Aja Wilson has earned her moment. She's a three-time WNBA MVP, a two-time champion, and a recent Olympic gold medal as 2024, and one of the most visible Black athletes in the world. Her jersey retirement during Black History Month is not just about her accomplishment, it's about what she represents for Black women in sport. But by announcing Clark's retirement ceremony on the same day, the institutions involved are effectively saying, we see your Black excellence, but we're going to shift the spotlight.
And what about the platforms for these events? Asia's ceremony is on SEC Plus, while Clark is on national TV.
That's another deliberate move. Access matters, Seth. By placing Clark's ceremony on a platform like Fox, they ensure her event reaches millions. Meanwhile, SEC Plus, a paid app, limits Aja's visibility. This reinforces the hierarchy of importance.
So even though both athletes are being celebrated, and Asia's jersey retirement was announced in October, the message is that one celebration is more worthy of national attention.
Exactly. And the timing being during Black History Month makes it even more blatant. It's a symbolic flex, a way of reminding us that no matter how much progress Black athletes like Aja make, whiteness will always find a way to center itself.
And how does this connect to the broader racial dynamics we've been discussing?
It connects directly. This is about maintaining the status quo. By overshadowing Aja's moment, institutions are signaling to audiences, sponsors, and future athletes that whiteness still holds power in this space. It's like a game of chess that Aja's success disrupts the narrative, so the system responds by creating a counter move. Clark's ceremony reestablished control.
Lil, you're really helping us see the bigger picture here. When we come back, we'll dive into the corporate side of things. Why would brands like Nike, who claim to champion diversity, play into this dynamic? We've been breaking down the racial politics surrounding Caitlin Clark's jersey retirement coinciding with Asia Wilson's during Black History Month. Now let's turn our focus to one of the biggest players in the game, Nike. Lil, Nike extended Asia Wilson's contract, promoted rising star Juju Watkins, and yet seems to elevate Caitlin Clark as the global face of women's basketball. What's really going on here? Is Nike a true ally, or are they playing both sides?
Says this is where the conversation gets tricky. Nike's move with Aja and Juju certainly signal diversity and inclusion. They're saying, look, we support Black excellence. We're here for the culture. But when you look closer, their broader strategy paints a more complicated picture. Caitlin Clark's elevated visibility, the Time magazine cover, the national TV coverage of her jersey requirement, tells us that Nike is hedging its bet. They're navigating two markets: progressive consumers who demand diversity and white consumers who still expect whiteness to be the standard.
So you're saying they're trying to appeal to everyone, but is that even possible?
It's not just possible, it's their entire business model. Nike is a global brand. To maintain dominance, they have to appeal to both sides of the aisle. Progressive audience who demand equity and inclusion, and more conservative, often white consumers who are more comfortable with the status quo. And this isn't new for Nike. They've always walked this tightrope. Remember when Colin Kaepernick campaign? On the surface, it was a bold stance for social justice. But at the same time, Nike continued to work with the NFL, a league that essentially blackballed Kaepernick.
Right. They cashed in on Kaepernick's activism, but never fully broke ties with the system he was protesting against.
Exactly. And we're seeing the same dual strategy here. By extending Aja Wilson's contract and promoting Juju Watkins, Nike appears progressive. They're tapping into the cultural power of these black athletes. But by positioning Caitlin Clark, as the global face of basketball, they're signaling to white consumers that they haven't forgotten it.
It's like they're saying we'll support black athletes, but don't worry, whiteness is still front and center.
Precisely. And here's the thing, the economic stakes are massive. White consumers still make up a significant portion of Nike's consumer base, especially in middle America. Elevating Caitlin Clark ensures they retain loyalty from that demographic while simultaneously promoting diversity.
But doesn't that undermine their so-called commitment to equity?
It does, and that's the contradiction Nike thrives on. They're not in the business of social justice. They're in the business of profit. Supporting Aja and Juju looks good on paper, but the real power is in visibility. Who gets covered story, the prime time ceremony, the global campaign.
Let's talk about that visibility. Why is it so important for Nike to make Caitlin Clark the face of basketball?
It's about it's all about maintaining cultural dominance. In a society still grappling with racial hierarchies, whiteness is seen as a universal standard. By elevating Clark, Nike reinforces that standard while simultaneously profiting from the visibility and achievement of black athletes like ours. Think about a historical example, Seth. In 1980, Larry Bird was positioned as the great white hope in basketball, even though Magic Johnson was arguably the better player and more dynamic personality. It's the same playbook, if an ear.
So we're seeing history repeat itself.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the timing of all of it. By promoting Clark's jersey retirement during Black History Month, Nike ensures her story dominates the narrative. It's a way of saying, yes, we support black athletes, but whiteness will always take center stage.
And they're doing all of this while claiming to be an ally.
Exactly. It's performative allyship at its finest. They give just enough to appear progressive while ensuring they don't alienate their core, often conservative consumer base.
Look, this is deep. When we come back, we'll dive into what this means for the future of women's basketball and how fans can hold brands like Nike accountable. In this segment, we're breaking down the numbers. Caitlin Clark's jersey retirement event is on national TV, with ticketed prices soaring to $1,000 a seat. Meanwhile, Asia Wilson's jersey retirement, happening on the same day, is only viewable on SEC Plus with tickets priced at $64. Now let's get into it. What do these numbers and platforms really tell us about the economic and media biases at play here?
Says these disparities are no accident. They reveal the underlying strategies of how media and economic systems perpetuate racial inequities in sport. The $1,000 ticket price for Clark event isn't just about demand. It's a signal. It says this is the premier event of the day. On the flip side, the $64 ticket price for Wilson's jersey retirement and the decision to regulate it to SEC Plus says a completely different message. It downplays the significance of her legacy, her contributions, and her status as the reigning global face of women's basketball.
So you're saying these decisions are intentional?
Without a doubt. Let's start with the platform. National TV coverage versus a subscription based app isn't just a random choice. National TV is accessible to millions, creating a sense of importance and cultural relevance. SEC Plus is behind the paywall, limiting the audience to a niche group. This move ensures Clark's event dominates the narrative while Wilson's is marginalized.
It feels like they're shaping public perception of who matters most in women's basketball.
Exactly. Media visibility is currency in sport. The more visible you are, the more you're perceived as valuable. not just as an athlete, but as a cultural icon. By placing Clark on national TV and regulating Wilson to SEC Plus, the system reinforces the idea that Clark is more marketable, more deserving of the spotlight.
But Asia Wilson just led Team USA to Olympic gold. She's clearly proven herself on a global stage.
And that's what makes it so insidious that Wilson achievements are undeniable. She's arguably the best player in the world right now. But the system isn't about merit. It's about maintaining racial and economic hierarchy. The $1,000 price per Clark event also plays into this. It's a status symbol. It creates the perception that her event is a must-see, while Wilson is positioned as just another routine moment.
So the price disparity isn't just about supply and demand, it's a deliberate strategy to signal importance.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the role of media in driving that demand. Clark has been the subject of countless feature stories, cover pieces, and highlight reels. The media saturation creates a narrative that she is the it player, the one worth investing in. Meanwhile, Wilson, despite her dominance, is less mainstream coverage. When she does, it's often within a niche sport media or focused on her as part of a team and not as an individual icon.
And that ties back to the racial politics we've been discussing.
It does. This isn't just about basketball. It's about who gets to represent the sport on a global stage. The media and economic systems work together to ensure that whiteness remains at the center. Clark's visibility reinforces her as the face of women's basketball, even when Wilson's achievements far surpass her.
Lil, what about the fans? Are they complicit in this dynamic?
Well, fans play a role, but they are also responding to what they're being fed. If the media constantly tells you that Clark is the star, that her event is the one to watch, you're more likely to buy into that narrative. At the same time, fans of black athletes like Wilson are often priced out of these premium events or left without accessible ways to engage. That's why the national TV versus app debate matters so much. It determines who gets to participate in these moments of celebration.
So what can we do? How do we challenge these biases?
It starts with calling out these disparities and holding these brands, media outlets, and institutions accountable. Fans can push back by demanding more equitable coverage and refusing to accept these blatant inequities as the norm. And as we've seen with social media, there's power in creating our own narrative. Fans of Aja Wilson and other black athletes can use their platforms to amplify their voices and ensure their legacies are not erased.
Lil, this has been eye opening. When we come back, we'll explore the larger implications of this dynamic for the future of women's basketball. In this segment, we're diving into one of the more complex and controversial topics of this conversation. Caitlin Clark as an unintentional but undeniably effective tool in reinforcing racial hierarchies within sports. Lil, let's start here. Clark's rise to stardom is impressive, but there's this underlying tension when we examine how she's being positioned in the media. What's really going on?
Cess, let me say up front, this isn't about Caitlin Clark as a person. She's an incredible athlete who's worked hard to get where she is. But what we're analyzing is how systems of white supremacy operate through her success. Clark, whether knowingly or not, functions as a Trojan horse in this system. By elevating her face as the face of women's basketball, media and corporate powers effectively reassert white dominance in a space where black athletes like Aja Wilson are undeniably leading.
So you're saying Clark's rise isn't just organic, it's strategic.
Exactly. Let's look at the pattern. Historically, whenever black athletes dominate a sport, the system shifts to reestablish whiteness at its center. Think of Larry Bird being taunted as the great white hope during the Magic Johnson era in basketball, or the way Anna Kovalchukova was marketed in tennis despite never winning a major championship, while Venus and Serena Williams were breaking records. Clark Rise mirrors this pattern. Her success is being leveraged to counterbalance the dominance of black athletes in women's basketball.
And what makes her effective as a Trojan horse, as you put it?
Several factors. First, her talent is undeniable, which makes it easier to justify the attention she gets. But second, her image, young, white, relatable, fits into a narrative that appeals to the mainstream audience and corporate sponsors. She's become the symbol of aspiration, not just for her skill, but for what she represents culturally. And that's where the racial politics come in. Her visibility isn't just about basketball. It's about reinforcing whiteness as the standard, even in a sport increasingly dominated by black talent.
Let's talk about her own awareness. Clark has publicly acknowledged her white privilege. How does that fit into this conversation?
Her acknowledgement of white privilege is commendable, but it also exposes the tension between personal awareness and structural complicity. By saying she earns her accolade, she's highlighting her hard work. But what goes unspoken is how the system amplifies her efforts in a way it does not for her black peers.
Can you give an example?
Absolutely. Take the media coverage. Clark's accomplishments are celebrated with features in Time magazine, while Asia Wilson, a three-time MVP, two-time champion, and Olympic gold medalist, often gets regulated to niche sport coverage like Sports Illustrated. Even when Clark acknowledges privilege, the system that benefit her continues unabated. Her statements might be well-meaning, but it doesn't challenge the structures that keep black athletes at a disadvantage.
So, in a way, her acknowledgement actually reinforces the system by leaving it unchallenged.
Exactly. It's a safe surface level acknowledgement that doesn't disrupt the status quo. And that's the brilliance of a Trojan horse concept. Clark doesn't have to actively perpetuate racial hierarchy. Her visibility and success within the system do the work for her.
This feels so layered. On the one hand, you want to celebrate her talent. On the other, you can't ignore how her rise comes at the expense of others.
And that's the core of this conversation says. It's not about tearing Clark down. It's about recognizing how her rise fits into a broader system and consistently a system that consistently sidelines black excellence. Clark's success isn't a zero sum game, but the way it's framed by the media and corporation often makes it feel like one. If we don't question these dynamics, we are risking allowing the system to continue unchallenged.
Lil, this has been powerful. Lil, when we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, this whole situation with the media, race, and power goes way beyond just one incident or one athlete. It's a reflection of the racial and political tensions that have been simmering in America for years. The current climate is so polarized that race, gender, and economic power are constantly colliding. It's almost like country can't figure out how to handle the success of black women in spaces that were traditionally reserved for white athletes.
Exactly, said. When you bring race and gender into the mix, it complicates everything. Take Caitlin Clark, for example. Her achievements were celebrated right away. She was embraced by the media as a dominant force in women's college basketball. But look at Aja Wilson. Despite her monumental impact, multiple MVPs, WNBA championships, Olympic gold, influencing the game on and off the court, her recognition came much slower. It's almost like people couldn't figure out how to place her in the conversation the same way. Wilson had to fight not just for recognition on the court, but for respect off, even though she was shaping the future of women's basketball.
That's where the politics come in. It's clear that Asia's delayed recognition isn't just about talent, it's about who gets to define excellence. When Clark's accomplishments were put on a pedestal immediately, it fit into a narrative that's been perpetuated about white athletes as the standard. Meanwhile, black women like Asia had to force the world to see them and recognize their value, not just through statistics, but by pushing boundaries outside of basketball too.
Right. And this ties to a larger racial dynamic. It's about who gets to tell the story and whose narrative gets to dominate the sports media cycle. Caitlin Clark media coverage is a product of a system that has been in place for a long time. A system where white athletes are often celebrated, especially when they're challenging records and setting new benchmarks. For black women like Aja, Don Stanley, and others, their dominance has been viewed as exceptional, but their mainstream recognition has taken a lot longer.
Absolutely. And we see the economic power at play here too. The sponsors and the media outlets all influence the narrative. Look at Asia's partnership with companies like Nike, Gatorade, and CarMax. She's reshaping the WNBA's image, not just through her gameplay, but also through her presence and brand building. For Caitlin Clark, having more of the media spotlight has become an easier story for those same companies to latch onto because they understand the cultural impact. The question becomes, are they really ready to invest in black women's success in the same way?
That's a tough question. When it comes to economic power, and media visibility, it's clear that systemic barriers still exist. Black athletes, especially women, are pushing through ceilings that others have already shattered. And this is a direct reflection of a broader racial and cultural implications at play. We've seen it in other industries where white talent gets immediately recognized and economic backing, while black talent has to work harder to even get a seat at the table.
Exactly. But I think the real question is how we, as fans, media consumers, and society as a whole, choose to navigate and challenge these racial and political dynamics. As the narrative shifts, because it shifted, even though slowly, how can we be part of that change? How do we move beyond celebrating just a few athletes and start building a space where black women are recognized for their dominance and contributions as a whole?
It's all about continuing to push for visibility. We need to make sure media is covering the full spectrum of women's sports, especially when black women are at the forefront. More importantly, we need to challenge these narratives that are pushed by outlets and advertisers. The industry and sports media need to recognize the value of investing in athletes like Aja Wilson, Don Stanley, and others who are shaping the future, not just as athletes, as the athletes who fit into the traditional mold.
That's the art of it. As we wrap this conversation up, it's clear that we're still dealing with deep rooted issues that intersect with race, gender, and economics. But what we also see is the power of black women in sports to disrupt those narratives. It's up to us, whether we're fans, journalists, or athletes ourselves, to keep pushing, keep questioning, and keep building a space where all women, especially black women, are celebrated and given the recognition they deserve.
Well said, Seth. This isn't just about celebrating athletes. It's about creating a space where everyone's contributions are recognized equally, no matter their race or gender. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to uplift these powerful women who are making history, not just on the court, but in every part of society.
As we wrap this up, Lil, let's take a moment to reflect on what's really at stake here. This isn't just about sports, it's about equity, representation, and the need to challenge the deeply ingrained systems that continue to dictate whose achievements are celebrated and whose are overlooked. If we don't confront these patterns, if we don't call out the media, corporations, and the sports industry for their lack of fair recognition, we're allowing this harmful dynamic to persist. The future of women's sports, especially for black athletes, depends on our collective effort to do better.
Absolutely, Seth. What's at stake is the continual marginalization of black athletes in spaces they've dominated for years. This isn't just about one game, one award, or one athlete. It's about breaking down the systems of white supremacy that still operate in the media and corporate spaces. Systems that make it harder for black women to receive the recognition they deserve. Fans and the media and corporations all play a role here. It's time to hold them accountable, to demand they amplify the voices and story of black athletes, and to stop allowing these patterns of erasure to just continue.
Exactly. So let's leave our listeners with some key takeaways. First off, media manipulation is real. Corporate interests drive narratives that often uphold white supremacy, leaving black athletes to constantly fight for their place in the conversation. From Caitlin Clark getting celebrated immediately to Asia Wilson having to earn her recognition, we see how these forces work. But it's bigger than that. When these athletes' accomplishments are minimized or overshadowed, we're depriving the world of a fuller, more accurate picture of greatness.
And let's not forget, says these athletes, black women are not just performing on the court. They're building brands, they're changing the game off the court, and leading in ways that transcend sport. The conversation around their achievement has to reflect that. If we truly want to uplift black athletes equitably, then the narrative must shift. Fans, media, and the corporations need to stop playing into a system that only values certain athletes based on race, gender, or economics. We need to celebrate black athletes for their talent, their impact, and their legacy without diminishing their success based on race.
That's right, Lil. It's time for all of us to hold ourselves accountable. Whether you're a fan, a journalist, or someone with economic power in sports, it's on all of us to shift the narrative. Black women in sports have been leading the way, and they deserve to be celebrated for it. Not just in small circles, but across the world stage. Their contributions, on and off the court, are monumental. It's up to us to make sure that the world sees that.
So, as we close this discussion, I challenge our listeners to pay attention, speak up, and take action. Demand better from me, demand better from the corporations, most importantly, demand better of ourselves. These athletes, these women are rewriting the history of sport, And it's time we recognize all their greatness.
Well said, Leo. And with that, we'll wrap up today's episode of Poly Sports. As always, thank you for tuning in. Let's keep pushing the conversation forward, lift the voices of Black athletes, and creating a future where their accomplishments are celebrated without hesitation. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey through this story. Let us know your thoughts, what inspires you to learn more about Asia's journey to her jersey number retirement, and how can we, as a community, continue to support women breaking barriers in sports. Remember, Asia Wilson isn't just a three-time MVP and a two-time WNBA champion as well as an Olympic gold medalist. She's a movement. Her story reminds us that it's about breaking barriers, challenging norms, and lifting others as you rise. Asia Wilson is living proof that being unapologetically yourself is the ultimate power move, and the world has seen the skills that define her greatness. Thanks for joining us on Cess Talk Sports and BY's Poly Sports. Keep fighting the good fight to ensure the visibility of Black female athletes, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's continue celebrating the incredible contribution of Black women in sports. And remember, sports are never just about the game. It's about the stories we tell and the change we create. Keep tuning in as we share more stories and perspectives that matter. Stay bold and stay inspired. Until next time, stay wise and stay engaged. Make sure you support the Be Wise Poly Sports podcast. This is Cess, your favorite auntie with Uncle Tendencies, and Political Lil signing off. Take care. Stay tuned. Talk soon. We out. Hey everyone, welcome back to Cess Talk Sports, where we dive into the intersections of sports, race, gender, politics, culture, and justice. I'm your favorite auntie with Uncle Tendency, Cess, and today we're joined by Political Lil, the sharp mind behind the Be Wise Poly Sports podcast. Together, we're breaking down what some are calling one of the most obvious dog whistles in sports this year. Political Lil, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Seth. You know, I'm ready to pull back the curtain and show the audience how these games, both on and off the court, are really played.
Absolutely. And today's discussion is about something that's been blowing up on social media. Caitlin Clark, her Time Magazine Athlete of the Year award, and her acknowledgement of white privilege. Now, let me set the stage for our listeners. Caitlin Clark, who's undeniably a fantastic player, recently received the Time Athlete of the Year award. During her interview, she openly admitted that she's benefited from white privilege.